This is the UFC, a world where bodies collide and careers are made or destroyed in minutes.
To the average viewer, it looks like real, raw, unfiltered violence. But behind the cage, is it all as real as it seems? Today, we break down the entire truth about UFC, from violent battles to clever business strategies.
This is the full story. Is UFC real or fake? The Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC, didn't start as a polished sport. It began in 1993 as a raw, violent experiment. No gloves, no weight classes, almost no rules. It asked one brutal question: which martial art is the best? Could a boxer beat a wrestler? Could karate stop Brazilian jiu-jitsu? Early UFC events looked more like street fights, chaotic, bloody, and unpredictable. It wasn't about sportsmanship, it was about survival. But as the violence shocked audiences, something began to shift. The business minds behind the UFC knew if this was going to last, it had to evolve. So they added rules. They introduced weight divisions, gloves, and referees. Slowly, it transformed into a real sport. By the early 2000s, names like Chuck Liddell, Georges St. Pierre, and Anderson Silva brought the UFC global respect. And today, the UFC is a billion-dollar empire. With events in over 30 countries, 600-plus fighters, and millions of fans watching around the world. Now it's no longer karate versus jiu-jitsu, it's elite athlete versus elite athlete, trained in every combat style imaginable. But with all that growth came control. Because when the money starts flowing, the business starts shaping the sport. Let's be absolutely clear. UFC fights are 100% real. The punches, they land hard. The knockouts, they're brutal. And yes, fighters can and do suffer permanent injuries. This is not scripted wrestling. Inside that octagon, it's all real combat. But here's where it gets interesting. While the fights are real, everything around the fights is strategically designed. Who fights whom? When does a fighter get a title shot? Who headlines the main event? Who gets a rematch? And who gets left behind? That's not sport. That's business. Just like the WWE, the UFC understands one powerful truth. Drama sells. It's not just about fighting, it's about storytelling. Nate Diaz lighting a joint at a weigh-in. Khabib jumping the cage after beating Conor. These aren't just fights. They're episodes in a high-stakes series. Heroes, villains, comebacks, betrayals. The trash talk, the heated face-offs, the beef that spills into press conferences. It all feels real, and much of it is. But it's also brilliant, calculated marketing. The UFC builds hype like a movie studio. They want fans emotionally invested, to pick sides, to cheer, to boo, to buy the pay-per-view. Because at the end of the day, every rivalry, every press conference, every headline is part of a larger machine, a machine that blends real violence with entertainment-level storytelling. And that's why UFC is unlike anything else in the world. Now comes the big question. Is the UFC scripted? Let's get one thing straight. No, UFC is not like WWE. There are no pre-written outcomes. No one tells the fighters who will win. There's no acting inside that cage. When the octagon closes, it's real punches, real blood, real pain. But here's the twist. There's a difference between scripting a fight and scripting a career. Because while the UFC doesn't script who wins, they do control everything else. They decide who gets hyped, who gets main events, who gets easy matchups, and who gets left in the shadows. It's not always about skill, it's often about story. Cut to Sean O'Malley rising fast. Cut to a deserving fighter being overlooked. If you're flashy, if you talk well, if you bring in views, you'll rise faster. If you're quiet or hard to market, you might be stuck on the undercard for years. Sometimes the UFC will protect a rising star, give them favorable matchups, delay fights against dangerous opponents, build the hype, create a legend. And sometimes, a fighter who deserves the shot won't get it, not because they aren't good enough, but because their name doesn't sell. So while the fights are real, the path to the fight is often carefully planned. This is not fake, but it is entertainment business. And in the UFC, business always comes first. At its core, the UFC isn't just a sport, it's a business. And a very smart one. It's owned by Endeavor, the same powerhouse behind some of Hollywood's biggest talent agencies. They know how to create stars, control narratives, and keep the money flowing. In the UFC, talent alone isn't enough. What matters most is how many people will pay to watch you fight. Cut to Conor McGregor walking in slow motion, fans screaming. Take Conor McGregor, for example. He's lost fights. He's been suspended. He hasn't held a title in years. But guess what? He still headlines pay-per-views. He still makes millions. He's still the face of the UFC. Why? Because he sells. Love him or hate him, people watch. And views mean dollars. Cut to silent, skilled fighters backstage, not getting attention. Meanwhile, there are dozens of insanely talented fighters grinding every day, winning fights, doing everything right. But they don't talk trash. They don't have wild personas. They don't draw headlines. So the UFC ignores them. It's not personal. It's just business. And when the UFC builds a star, they control the image, the media access, the storyline. They decide what clips go viral, who sits at press conferences, who gets the cameras, and who stays in the shadows. Cut to carefully edited promos, dramatic slow-mo walkouts. It's not fake. It's not illegal. It's just incredibly strategic. The UFC doesn't just promote fights. It produces stars. And in a world where attention equals money, no one does it better. Behind the bright lights, behind the knockouts, the belts, the screaming fans, lies something much bigger than just a fight. The UFC owns its own media empire. From UFC Embedded to Fight Pass to massive ESPN broadcast deals, they don't just host fights. They control the entire story. Cut to UFC, logo montage, UFC Embedded behind-the-scenes clips. Every clip you see, every viral moment, every documentary episode is filtered through one lens, the UFC's lens. They decide what stories get told, what drama gets hyped, which fighters get the spotlight, and which ones disappear. Cut to star fighters featured constantly in promos. If you follow the rules, promote the fight, show up with energy, trash talk, sell your brand, you rise. You get featured in promos, you get mic time, you become a star. But if you ask the wrong questions, speak out against pay, criticize the company, then suddenly you're not in the trailer. Your fights aren't being pushed. Your story goes silent. Cut to fighters like Francis Ngannou or Nate Diaz speaking about contracts. Many fighters have opened up about unfair contracts, low pay, and the pressure to stay quiet. Some say they're underpaid. Others say they're afraid to speak out because they know what happens when you cross the machine. The UFC holds the keys to their careers. If they want to freeze you out, they can. If they want to cut you off, they will. Cut to past fighters being cut or benched after calling for unionization or more pay. It's not just a fight game. It's a game of power. And in that game, the UFC is the gatekeeper. They decide who gets in and who gets buried. Cue serious music shift. Now here's the truth. The UFC is brilliant at what it does. It's built global stars, it's changed the world of combat sports, and it's inspired millions. But behind the greatness is a carefully controlled system where media, money, and matchups are all managed from the top. So yes, the punches are real, the fighters are real, the pain, the sweat, the knockouts, all real. But the narrative, that's a production. And in the UFC, only a few ever control the script. So is UFC real? Yes. Is it fake? Not exactly. But it lives in a gray zone where real violence meets corporate storytelling. Think of it like reality TV. The moments are unscripted, but the environment is carefully shaped. And that's what makes UFC so unique and controversial. UFC is the most brutal, exciting combat sport in the world. But behind every punch, there's a plan. Behind every title shot, there's a strategy. Behind every star, there's a machine. The fighting is real, but the game, that's where things get interesting. So next time you watch a UFC fight, remember, you're not just watching a sport, you're watching a war built for business. Like, comment, subscribe, and tell us, is the UFC more real or more entertainment?